Hey everybody, it's Bust with our patch note review for the 3.19 patch. This is the big balance patch following the release of the Darkin Saga Domination. It's the hopes and dreams everyone has attached to the Nerf Seraphine patch. And so we'll get to the cards themselves in a moment. I feel like we never touch on the skins section of these things. We do have a new set of skins coming out, and I think there's a couple of different ways you could rate this. The way that initially came to mind in terms of rating these skins, determining how good they were, was taking a look at this and saying, oh, Ari, that's a Ionia champion, 0 out of 10. Evelyn, almost a Shadow Isles champion, probably a 2 out of 10. Kindred, a Shadow Isles champion, 1 out of 10. Master Yi, Ionia champion, 0 out of 10. You got Teemo here. Teemo could probably get like a 6 or a 7. That's pretty good. And then Yasuo, Ionia, 0 out of 10. And so, done with that, but I was like, man, there's more than one way to pick a pine cone, as whoever says that. Who's more than one way to pick a pine cone? I forget what unit that is. And then I was like, is there another way to think of this? And it was like, well, the thing that I usually bitch about when it comes to the skins and their usefulness and their desire to be purchased and everything is whether or not they just make me feel sad. A lot of these are very dark and angry. The corrupted skins you looked at and it's just like, no, I'm never purchasing this. And so, in terms of pool party skins being 10 out of 10 and then the corrupted skins being 0 out of 10, where in the spectrum do these fall? And much higher. Ari looks pretty happy. Evelyn, definitely 9 out of 10 compared to the original art. She definitely looks much happier here. This is much more fun. Who are these other ones? Kindred, I'm not sure what the deal with Kindred is. It looks like he changed into some kind of fox thing. Definitely happier, like 8 out of 10. Master Yi, Teemo, and Yasuo, both in the 8 to 9 range. And so that's pretty good. That's a much better rating than you might have initially given them. Is it Ionia or Shadow Isles? Get that shit out of here. But is it happy? Top-notch stuff. And so I'm sure we'll have to pick up some of these, play with these a bit as we go through the pay-to-win lifestyle. But in terms of the cards and the changes and the buffs and everything, I'll go through each of these pretty quickly. Some of them I don't think are too big or too spectacular. Varus having a change here. I thought Varus was good as he was, so making him a little bit easier to level up should meet this requirement of having him see a little bit more play. Good stuff there. On to Jinx. She now creates a Super Mega Death Rocket on level up. That seems to make sense to me. I still feel like Jinx is kind of in the space to where she's not really constructive competitive. That requirement of just emptying out your hand is pretty huge. And without other activators, like things like Experimental Alchemist, whatever the 6-cost guy is that makes you discard your hand, she is pretty tough to activate. And so this, could see her push the way to the forefront as we lose out on cards like Decimate and we look for burn spells to close out an opponent. If we slightly change our thought process to, is Jinx just a different form of Decimate? Then it seems to be a little bit more reasonable in terms of what you can try and pull off with Jinx. And so this is good. I'm interested in trying out Jinx, see if there's anything happening there. Jax gets an update. He's a little bit easier to flip, and this is kind of an interesting space to me as well. I'm curious how the meta shakes up, because we are kind of getting into this spot to where if you ignored the Seraphine half of the meta, we were getting into this kind of big bruiser, overwhelming style meta with Pantheon and Varus and Jax, and it's tough to tell if that was just a function of Tumble being so good, or if that was a function of just what you had to do to crush through your opponent's units, right? You typically have to either overwhelm, elusive, or rally, and you don't always see the big go tall overwhelm dudes push their way up to the top. But I'm curious if that's what we're going to see fall forward in the next patch with the likes of Varus catching a slight buff and Jax catching a slight buff. See if that can't make them relevant as those big overwhelmed game closers. But interesting stuff. I'm happy to see that one as well. The Snip, Snip, Snip upgrade to Gwen, that's completely fine. That is kind of frustrating to have her have 0 power and not deal damage or something, and so it's nice that it does have this base 2 drain attached to it. It sucks to feel bad whenever you level up a champion and then their ability's worse than it was on the front side. So reasonable stuff there. The big changes of the patch, Seraphine and Fan Club President. It's, it's a start, I guess. I was really hoping for more. I was hoping for things in terms of, say, with Fan Club President, that it would allow you to only generate cards from your factions. And so you didn't have to deal with this shit to where they're generating perfection out of the entirety of the game. And they're limited to just the things within P and Z and your other factions. I could see that being somewhat problematic. I don't know the total number of 5-cost spells in P and Z. I could definitely see it being an issue in terms of the card selection being, too good or not enough, but I was really hoping to see a little bit more come out of these. Now, the nerf to Fan Club President should be fairly big. Like, jumping from 4 to 5 mana is pretty huge. And so I do suspect it's going to be a fairly large update, and more than it always is, much worse than it seems, those little changes to mana. But I think that's probably decent. The one that really strikes me as surprising, though, is Seraphine. The thing that we've kind of seen across time is that good balance point of a 2-cost unit in their stats and them generating a card. And so I can't tell if the thing that we're supposed to expect is like, if it generates a card via Manifest, you get 3 stats. That's where we're having Conchologist and Reggie. They got nerfed down to 3 stats because they were too good at that price point. Then the next point of comparison is you have some cards that are like 2 2s for 2, like there's the Disciple of Moron or whatever the new one is called that generates the preparations. That's kind of a different space when you know what you're getting. Now that doesn't apply across everything, right? Boom Baboon got nerfed down to a 2-1, but it seems like that's kind of the thought process. If you're getting kind of a guaranteed card, to where there's not as much variety, there's not as much splendor in what you can select, then you kind of got 4 stats. And then if you were just a kind of standard combating unit, then you got 5 stats. And so, I thought that was kind of the space we were living in. And then it is okay to say champion should just be a little bit stronger. That's the big keystone to every deck is the champion. But I wasn't expecting Seraphine to just have her nerf be to the new spells played. I know that 9 new spells is kind of tough to pull off, but just being in the space of being a 5-stat 2-drop that generates a card is absolutely fantastic. And then it's not unreasonable to say I've gotten to turn 9 and I can still flip Seraphine and still just get these giant OTKs right out of the way. And so, I think kind of at least the positive thing here and the saving grace is if the knee-jerk reaction wasn't too big, there should be a new set release coming out here soon. I think it's just 2 weeks away, not a month away. I think that's right. If the Worlds qualifier is on November the 19th and new cards come out before then it's coming up soon, or if it was the thing before Worlds, I don't know. But I think it's only 2 weeks until new cards and not a month, and we'll have a chance to get a further nerf to Seraphine if it doesn't feel like enough, potentially. And so, my preferred nerf to Seraphine would have been remove her from the game. After that, I thought that she should have been like a 1-2 or a 1-3, but I guess altering the flip is something. If we're gonna hate on this card, we got to take the wins where we can get them. And so hopefully this is enough to where she's not that 25% of the meta anymore. Moving forward, onto the Vayne changes. Tumble now costs 4, and then the upgrade to Vayne was that the Tumble will be reduced in cost to 0 instead of reduced by 3. So you technically still get your free Tumbles on upgrade. And I think this is pretty reasonable. Tumble was quite powerful, still is quite powerful, and I still suspect Vayne is going to be pretty powerful in the format. And so I don't suspect that this is going to be that big, because the thing that I start to worry about with Vayne is like once you start having the nerfs to the rallies in Demacia, does that make you then just look towards Vayne and say, well, I'm just going to play Vayne instead? And that doesn't, completely apply, but I'm trying to think if it's interesting and just in terms of the options and what you get out of these cards, or if we're going to see a kind of space in Demacia where you pay 1 price for a rally and then you pay 1 price for a free attack, right, between like Tumble or Cataclysm or whatever, and I'm curious where that space falls out. But nonetheless, Vayne is quite strong. A 7-stat unit that generates a card is quite good, and I don't think she's going to be leaving the meta anytime soon. On further, down to Lee Sin. He now takes 10 spells to cast instead of 8. I was really surprised to see that this didn't happen sooner. As you come out here and print double casting spells, whatever the cultist Ionia spell is that just gives you 2 cost onto Lee Sin, I was really surprised that that wasn't kind of the breakpoint to say, oh yeah, Lee Sin is pretty oppressive. Maybe we should kind of preemptively nerf him. But, better late than never, I guess. I think that Lee Sin's probably just kind of one of those really dangerous designs that you can't quite fix until you do something about the overwhelm interaction. And so I don't know entirely how I feel about this. If you want to just say nerf him into oblivion to where he can't do a dragon kick until like turn 10, or if you want to just go in and say something like Lee Sin, does a dragon kick, he can't deal combat damage that turn or something. I think the fix is more along those lines, is to where Lee Sin's attack becomes dragon kick, and you can't do the overwhelm thing, is where Lee Sin probably needs to be fixed, air quotes fixed, but I'll take these nerfs where they come. I don't think the Lee Sin play patterns are particularly fun, just to go, oops, I win, without that much effort. And so hopefully he'll not be so oppressive up here. On to the action changes. Warlord's Horde costing 1 more on the countdown. Sounds reasonable. Action was always a very high-powered inclusion into the Shurima decks. He just does everything, right? And I always described him as kind of a death by 1,000 cuts, because it doesn't seem like action really does that much, right? He attacks for 2 or 4 damage and nobody really cares. He levels up and isn't some kind of stat monster. The draw a card thing off the front palace isn't that big. Like, it's just the addition of all this stuff across the course of a game as to where he dealt 4 damage and then your opponent couldn't attack, and then he got a quick attack challenge and then you drew a card off the horde. It's just a big collection of small things that add up into something big. And so I think increasing the countdown on each of these by 1 is probably pretty reasonable. Then on to Swain, having his attack point drop 1. That's fine. I didn't think Swain was particularly oppressive. Like, as you listen to like the themes of the way FTP Bust feels about everything, you say, is it an Ionia card? Nerf it to oblivion. Is it a P&Z card? Get it out of here. But we're coming up to a Noxan champion. He's doing his overwhelm thing, coming in with the combat damages. Not that bad, It's not that bad. And so I get it. I felt like it's an interesting thing in the game to where the stat relevance is, right? And the probable most important stat in the game is that price point where you're getting 3 health. Just about everything in the game is 3 health, and it feels like a big upgrade when you go from 3 to 4. And I think this change with Swain really kind of ties into that, and you can really feel it in terms of, I don't feel like the front side with Swain was that oppressive. It definitely feels weaker there, but it was on the flip side as to where Swain getting that overwhelm and then just doing the massive AoE to the opposing team, that's where it felt a little bit strong. And so I'm kind of curious if like the answer here wasn't changing him from a 4/6 to a 3/6 and then letting him stay at +1/+1 on both levels, as much as maybe it should have been he's a 4/6 on the front, but then a 4/7 on the back. And that gets pretty confusing, as you change stats just for one singular card. It doesn't get +1/+1 where everything else in the game gets +1/+1. But I think that would be, kind of a potentially interesting space. Probably a little bit too complex. You would have to just say it on the front of the card somewhere, I think, so that you knew when Swain levels up, he only gets +1/+0 instead of, or whatever, +0/+1 instead of 1/1. But I feel like that's like the price point of goodness where Swain would probably feel really nice, is 4 power on the front and the back. Into the Ionian Tellstones, it now generates Gruesome Theater instead of oh shit, they put 2 changes in there. I only remembered on my initial pass through the Gruesome Theater, they replaced Homecoming with Gruesome Theater, but then they also replaced Ritual of Renewal with, or replaced Health Potion with Ritual of Renewal. And so, as I've mentioned earlier, I'm not a big Ionia player, but I imagine that this is a pretty gigantic change. Homecoming has just been such a monumentally powerful card. It's surprising to me how much better Homecoming is than Will of Ionia, but just having the big supreme versatility coming out of the Tellstones and also generating the premier removal spell probably needed nerfed a little bit. In terms of changes I thought that were coming with this, I thought it might go up to 2 mana, or I thought they might replace Will of Ionia with Homecoming. But it feels like this has really gotten kind of slammed into the ground in terms of the combo style decks, right? So if you're looking at a Nami deck or a Lee Sin deck, they're going to be pretty upset about these changes, probably not looking to play the Tellstones anymore. But if you're looking at a more like control decky kind of thing, like a Karma based deck, then you might be a little bit more interested in this. It has a little bit more grind to it. It has, actually better aggro stopping potential, and the Gruesome Theater being cheaper. And so I don't think it'll leave the game. I don't think the Ionian Tellstones is going anywhere, but I think a different variety of deck are going to be the one that wants the Tellstones now. Then onto the Shimon Wind, it now summons on Focused instead of Burst. And I think that's kind of interesting. It should, make combats a lot more challenging for these decks to where you don't get just the free blocker, right? You don't just get to say, oh, cool, you're going to open attack on me. I get this random Shimon Wind to block your 5 attack unit. And that should count towards quite a bit. And then it's kind of in the same vein as taking cards like Nami down a touch, to where you can't make this just big open attack where you have like a Nami on board and one dude, and then you drop the Shimon Wind and cast like 6 spells and OTK out of nowhere. You can still, I guess, kind of pull that off with the burst or the focus aspect, but the blocking aspect has been removed. This is another card I don't play a ton of, and so it seems like something that the decks that wanted it before will still want it. It's just going to be much worse on that kind of defensive aspect. Now, the big changes that I can really speak to, the ones that I know in my heart and I know how to feel about, Relentless Pursuit and Golden Aegis. Relentless Pursuit no longer giving +1/+1, and Golden Aegis going up to 5 mana. And I think this is a really kind of interesting set of changes. It really sets the baseline on what we're going to be paying for our rally, right? If Relentless Pursuit was initially a 3-cost fast spell, then they made it like a 3-cost slow spell, then they made it a 4-cost slow spell, but it gave +1/+1, and then it just, at the end of the day, a 4-cost rally is good enough. That should be strong enough. And so I think it's kind of interesting now, the space it gives you as to where, do you want to spend 4 mana and just play the vanilla rally card, or do you want to spend 5 mana and potentially get a little bit more out of it? I suspect that the vast majority of the decks that wanted the rallies are going to just play Relentless Pursuit. Now, the thing that I think it kind of gets interesting a little bit further, and that if you want to print additional rallies, at what point do they, Barrier is a very strong ability for 1 mana. If you're wanting to put a new ability on top of a rally, does it really feel worth 5 mana? I think that's where you kind of get into the odd and interesting space here, right? The permanent +1/+1 isn't that big of a deal, but Barrier is. And so now if you want to print a new rally that gives out a new keyword, or it does improvise, or whatever, it's odd now in that the price point has been set at 4, and then adding 1 more for that extra ability. And so I think it's kind of odd, and thought like a lot of the decks that are really looking for this don't mind the additional cost, right? If you're playing Scouts, you could occasionally have those turn 7 games to where you play Cithria and attack and then rally after, then re-attack. But decks like Scouts tended to be okay with playing this extra mana. They tended to just end the game on that final turn and didn't really care, right? You do have to pay up, if you want to say for Demacia and rally, it's a little bit more expensive, but it wasn't the same thing as like compared to Poppy Tarek, as to where the price point is really, really important in pulling off some additional turns. And so I think this is a good setup. I am glad to see that rallies just don't flat out cost 5 mana across the board. I'm glad that the change to Relentless Pursuit wasn't like grant an ally +3/+3 but cost 5 mana. But I am kind of interested in the way that a future rally would be printed in this sense. But I think these are all still well and good. I think as I'm just kind of like having thoughts go through my brain, I'm kind of curious as well in the sense of if a faction will ever be able to do it better, right? We've currently seen Demacia, Bilgewater, and Noxus with the rallies. The rallies in Noxus are Katarina and Shunpo, Shunpo costing 5, dealing 2 damage to a unit nowhere near as good as a barrier. We have the ones for Demacia here, and then you have Blood in the Water and Bilgewater. Now, I'm curious if there's ever a space to like what we're looking at in terms of, is this just what these factions get to do? Or do other factions get to do it better, or get to do it worse? Like, do you ever? I'm sure someone at Riot is just like chomping at the bit to print a 3-mana rally in Ionia. somebody has a card primed and ready, 3-mana fast. Counter a spell. If there's no spell on the stack, just rally. And I'm sure they can't wait to get that guy out there and printed. It's what Ionia needs. But, it's kind of interesting, though, right? In the terms of faction identity, do factions just get rallies? Or is someone going to get better? Or are you going to have a Freylord rally that costs like 7 mana or something? I'm curious how that kind of aspect of the design pans out. At the end of the day, though, I don't feel completely hurt by the nerfs to the rallies. On to the next one, Curse of the Tomb. We didn't get a full taste of Curse of the Tomb. It really ran into problems with Ezreal Seraphine running around. And if you're wanting to go really big with the OTK turns, and then just having your big OTK get disintegrated, it was kind of a problem. And so it didn't really rise up in this meta, but we could definitely see the power. We've definitely played a lot of decks like Darius Nar and a lot of decks like... the Shurima Overwhelms, whatever you want to call it, then even the Renekton decks or the Gnar decks, whatever, the Papercraft Dragony style decks, we've ran a lot of that in here, and I'm not really surprised to see Curse of the Tomb catch a bit of a tone down. I think if it came into the world in a different meta, it might have been super oppressive, but it kind of came into this strange space to where Disintegrate was fairly big, and these OTK plays were fairly scary, and so interesting to see it nerfed down a little bit. On to the next one, Saga Seeker. I think this is quite interesting as well. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of that 3 health breakpoint in Swain, and that's where Saga Seeker falls apart now, right? And so if you want to play Saga Seeker on 1, you equip it with your +1/+1 equipment on turn 2. It's now only a 3/3, and it trades with every 2-drop in the game. And so I think this is a pretty big update to Saga Seeker. I'm admittedly not a big faded player, but this feels like a pretty huge nerf. It takes it, I don't want to say it makes it feel more high rolly, but having a unit that now dies to like Make It Rain and Parlay and Blade's Edge and all the 1 damage pings while also trading with all the 2-drops, it makes faded take a whole lot more work to actually get the payoff. And so curious to see how he pans out. And with the Ionian Hookmaster, this is a beautiful nerf. This card was just way too strong. It was kind of innocuous in its initial appearance, but once we got to play with this thing, I was literally just designing every deck saying like, okay, how do I start with Noxus or how do I start with Ionia so I can singularly fit this unit in? This was far and away probably the best unit in the set, just outright better than Jax. And so he had it coming. I hate to see a nerf fall to. This is like the real yin and yang of the world, right? As to where I hate seeing a nerf fall to a Noxus unit, but I love seeing a nerf fall to an Ionian unit. Someone at Riot was like, "I got you covered on this one, Bust. Let's see how you slip up on the Hookmaster. This is a little bit of the light side, a little bit of the dark side, all tied up into one." Okay, so another interesting set of cards to me. Paparo the Great is something that we actually had a bit of success with a few patches ago. It's back playing Paparo with Poppy and the rallies and everything. It seems like it was probably back in like a Bard patch or something. But, it was a pretty reasonable thing going for the Yordles. And I'm curious the kind of space we get when we see these 3 updates all at once. And so you do note that they don't play towards the Tristana-style Yordles, right? They aren't a multi-faction thing. This is the Yordle buff up all my small bros kind of thing. And I'm curious how these actually play out. And that was basically just playing a bunch of cheap units, a bunch of cheap challengers. You have your Yordle Squires, you have your Petricite Broadwings. You're getting all of that boosted with Poppies. And then you're closing out the games with the rallies. And This is, a really aggressive collection of cards now. Paparo is your value engine. He now manifests a Yordle instead of giving you a random one. The attack ability is quite strong. The Swole Squirrel can be a fairly big stat monster, right? If you play a 1-drop on 1, a 2-drop on 2, then play a Swole Squirrel, he's going to be a 4/4 on 3. Or the Swole Scout. They got rid of that elusive thing or whatever he used to do. And then Yordle Newbie, upgraded to a 1-cost unit. I'm curious how he ends up playing out. When you summon a Yordle, give me 2/0 this round. It's a fairly scary stat line, in that he gets killed by every challenger and doesn't kill a unit back, the kind of Annie problem. He's also kind of awkward in the sense that one of your big units that is necessary for success is that quick attack thing, the 2-cost 2/2 that gives units with equal or less attack quick attack. So if you play 2 Yordles, you can't quick attack the newbie. But getting another cheap cost play is extremely important in these decks, both in terms of using Poppy and using Yordle Captain, the 4/4. And so I think there could definitely be something here. I felt like the Yordle's deck was close to being good back in that Poppy patch, whatever that was, like six months ago or so. And so I'm definitely kind of interested in trying out the new Yordle package. Moving on, Shatter costs 1 less, don't care. Rhinefang Wolf catches a point of toughness, helps add him into the world of relevance, right? But I don't think this is enough to make me want to play either of these cards. It's like, Shatter is interesting in that it can be generated by stuff, but it's not a card I ever physically want in my deck. And Rhinefang Wolf, it's kind of tough in the sense that the only real card at the moment that cares about Frostbite, right? We're going to ignore the kind of like fringe strategies of frostbiting a unit and then hitting it in a Noxcry arena, frostbiting a unit and hitting it with a Culling Strike. The only card that currently really cares about your opponent's units being frostbitten is Ash. And if we're making attacks with Ash, you don't want your opponent's units blocking anyways, right? You want to be making this big OTK attack when your opponent's units just can't block whatsoever. And so it's kind of awkward in the sense that it's just polarized ideas, right? Let's build this really unblockable board, but let's challenge a unit in the same combat. And so I get it. I know you can Frostbite early and get a Rhinefang Wolf trade and then still do that attack later, but it feels like they're kind of competing themes. I would like to see the Rhinefang Wolf be kind of in a world to where Frostbite does something different than just Ash. And so, we'll see when the next set comes out. Sometimes these changes are a bit of an indicator of what's to come, and we haven't really hit on Freylord and in the Darkin Saga. It's really just been Ornn and then a handful of support cards. We haven't seen the Freylord Darkin equipment, and so I'm curious if we get a little bit more Frostbite love in the upcoming patch when we start to see the changes like this. I'll be a little bit curious. It's just, again, I don't think it's bad. It's very fringe playable, and it just feels like a competing theme with Ash. I'd like to see something else to where it's a little bit more on theme with the Wolf. Into Troll Scavenger, this is another one. It's just like a really weird update. I played an absolute ton of the ramp decks. I was perhaps the biggest supporter in the world of the Mount Targon ramp deck. They nerfed it, thanks a whole lot. And the way that we get back to being competitive with the big ramp deck is Troll Scavenger. Fuck off. Come on, this is dumb. Like, I hated this ability in Expedition. This was a strategy as to where you were trying to build the most super high rolly decks ever and then just hoping, right? If you're playing a limited deck, you can't play like eight cost cards in it to activate all of your beholds. You can only play like 2 or 3. There's no cards in the game to generate those cards except for Trundle. And then you have to come out here and try and play like Troll Scavenger and Faces of the Old Ones, whatever the 2-cost ramp card is. And it was like whenever you would be playing and you would see this guy activate on turn 2, or you would see that ramp card activate on turn 2, it was so infuriating because you knew what garbage your opponent was playing to be able to pull that off. They were either just playing the biggest shit deck ever, or they were just the luckiest person ever. Never felt good. And so Troll Scavenger, I mean, it's never going to see play in Constructed. I really just kick him out. Get him out of the game. Get him out of here. My blood pressure has rose like 5 points seeing this guy come out. I'm done. Get him out of here. We're out of the way. We're moving on. And so the big obliterate removal spells. Hex Obliterator deals 1 more damage. That's fine. I think this card, I'm interested in the sense, as we were talking about with the rallies and what factions are and are not allowed to do. Is Obliterate something that PNZ is going to be allowed to do? Good. I should say, are they allowed to do it well? Are they allowed to do it on the fringe or not at all? And as we start to improve cards like Hex Obliterator, sounds like Obliterate well is something that we should expect them to do. And it's not only a Targon thing. And so we'll see if this is just a fringe card. It makes sense thematically, I guess, if you're getting super shocked like Teemo or whoever that little Yorda looking thing is, then perhaps you do just get completely removed from the game. But outside of the picture, it doesn't strike me as being a very PNZ style thing. But nonetheless, it could be a little bit more playable now. I'm not sure what deck wants this, but it seems like a card that's more relevantly just generated by Reggie, as opposed to a card you want to include in your deck. Same kind of thing with Celestial Impact. At least I like how they're kind of positioning this within Targon, right? If you're wanting to play the Sunburst, it only costs 5 mana now. If you want to go a little bit bigger in terms of guaranteed working and now healing your Nexus, then you have to pay a little bit more. Makes sense. I felt like at 7 mana, just removing a unit as compared to playing Sunburst at 5, you're going to play the Sunburst at 5 like 99.9% of the time. So it is nice to see a little bit of variety coming in with the Celestial Impact. The cards were just too close to being the same thing. Down with the Ravenbloom Conservatory. Countdown from 12 to 11, probably fine. I think it was initially at like 8 or 9. That was clearly way too low. Countdown at 12 was clearly way too high. Countdown at 11, we'll see. It's not surprising to see. I think somewhere between 10 and 11 is where you're going to say either, this is too good, probably not, but is it too bad to be unplayable? Probably not as well. Probably needs to be 10.5, right? Lord Broadbane gets some stats. Good job. I mean, dealing 2 damage to an enemy for 6 is not enough. I think it might kill the unit. I don't know. I've never played him. This card's just too expensive for what it does. Flame Tongue, Kavu, you are not. So then Saiyan, not Saiyan Thousand Tail, just Saiyan. They've already done their updates on this. I noticed earlier when I was looking through this, they had the Ionian Hookmaster as the fish fight picture and some other things on here. Reddit always goes through these hardcore and makes fun of all the typos Riot makes, but they apparently left Saiyan in. Not the Saiyan Thousand Tail, just Saiyan. He gets his 2 points of health back. That's fine. I was under the impression that the health just didn't matter. This was a card that was typically just going into decks that were trying to get a fully wide board and kill you with elusives and stuff, and you just usually played it and won the game. And so apparently the stats matter. I don't know. Wasn't a deck we were playing, but I could see the reversion being okay. Literally no one was playing this ever since the nerf hit. Laurent Duelist, kind of an interesting rework. So it used to be a 4-2 for 3 that gave a unit on board challenger. Now it's a 2-2 for 2 that gives a unit in hand challenger. And so it gives you a little bit more opportunity for setup and a little bit of faster attacking, if you will, right? If you have to say like it's turn 5 and you want to play a unit and then you want to play the Duelist on it and try and get an attack in the same turn, it's a little kind of transparent, and you're really limited in your mana. And so I think it's kind of nice that you have the opportunity to say, give a 5 or 6 cost unit in your hand challenger, play it later, while still kind of maintaining these same themes. And so it seems like a pretty powerful upgrade to me. I'm surprised it's only a 2-2, Seraphine gets to be a 5-stat 2-drop that generates a card and has a flip ability. Apparently, Demacia only gets 4-stat 2-drops that give a combat stat, and so that's what it is what it is, man. But I'm kind of interested in trying it. It's putting Confront on a unit is a pretty reasonable thought. So Ibaros gets +1/+1, so you can't kill him with silence. Makes sense to me. I have seen maybe like 2 or 3 games to where the Bilgewater Darkin equipment was played. I tried some brew decks with it, and it just didn't feel very good. You could probably give this guy +10/+10, and nobody would still play it. And so, welcome to the world of the stats, Ibaros. Safety Inspector gets a reduction in mana from 5 or from 6 cost to 5 while losing a couple points of stats. Seems fine. I played a lot of Talia Ziggs style decks, and I was never interested in having Safety Inspector. The big issue with those decks were the nerfs to the arsenal, and so I'm curious. Like the Safety Inspector would start being interesting to me if he cost like 3 mana, right? If he was a 3 mana 3/3 that generated these things, that would be kind of neat. It's just once you get up into this expensive space, you're really limited in what you can play. Because everything's just so expensive, right? Your hand's going to get clogged up. And so if you're, say, playing a deck with Talia, and then you want to play the Arsenal, and then you want to play another like 6 cost unit or something, right? The thing that gives all of your units +2/+2 and overwhelm. Like you just don't have room in your curve to play a card like Safety Inspector because those cards we just mentioned outright win the game, right? Talia pretty much outright wins the game. You're only playing one copy of the +2/+2 thing, but that typically just outright wins the game, and then the Arsenal should outright win the game. He doesn't get Scout Elusive anymore, but he's in that same kind of space, and the Safety Inspector is just nowhere on the same power level as those other cards. You don't play the Safety Inspector and say, okay, I outright win the game now. And so that's why I'm saying if he was cheaper, right? If he was a 2/2 for 2, a 3/3 for 3, or whatever, then you could get a little bit more usage out of the curve replacement in the early game. But in the late game space, you just don't have the space for it. And so I don't think that's ever going to work out there. Escaped Abomination, getting some changes. If memory serves, he was a 4/3, then he got nerfed down to a 4/2. Now he's getting buffed, air quotes, I guess, up to a 3/3. And in a bit of my time playing with things like Thresh Nasus, I felt like that point of health was the big problem. And so it just felt bad to go through the sequences. You get your Cursed Keeper on the board, you play a card to kill it off, you get your Escaped Abomination, and then it just trades with your opponent's 1-drop. And so that always felt pretty terrible. I think that being a 3/3 stat line is definitely better than being a 4/2, and this might bring back some of those Slayers style decks, given that the Escaped Abomination, not the Escape, the Cursed Keeper was so important to what of a lot they were doing. Bone Club gets +1/+1. Pretty easy. This is still trash. A 5 mana equipment needs to win you the game, and these stats don't do it. This is kind of fringe playable in that you may include one copy in a deck because it's just a really high valued component that you can play over and over and over again. But in terms of making this competitive viable, a 5 mana equipment like this needs to give Overwhelm. And so I don't think this will ever see constructed play in its current state. But one of the kind of interesting things is it is a fairly relevant upgrade to the Path of Champions in the Ornn deck. And so if that's your thing, you might be interested in the Bone Club update. So moving down, Shadowblade Fanatic gets a 3rd point of health. Could be useful. I mean, a 3/3 quick attack is a good deal. It's just a matter of finding the deck that wants this stuff, right? It doesn't really have a thing that says, hey, put me in this deck, right? The 3/3 quick attack ground based doesn't really fit in with any of the kind of Ionian aggro strategies. Those all tend to be elusives. Generating a Shadow Fiend doesn't really fit in with the ephemerals kind of strategies. It's just kind of too slow. And then it has Cultist, and so I guess if you're looking for a way to get your Varus drawn, it might do something there. But it's kind of the way we always talk about it is you don't want to half-ass anything, you want to whole-ass one thing, and this is just half-assing everything. And so, that point of toughness is quite relevant, but I don't think it's going to be enough to make him see play. Same deal with the Wrathful Rider. Just an 8 attack 5-drop with only 3 health, not going to be enough to do anything. It trades with 2-drops. You can't play a 5-mana unit, have it trade with your opponent's 2. So not so much there. Moving on, Gorlith getting a couple of points of health. I don't think that's going to matter. The thing with Gorlith isn't his stat line, it's his cost. And games typically don't go until turn 9. Turn 9 is the kind of break point to where every game ends. And at least that's the way the game kind of feels like it was moving to, as we were like a few patches ago in that space to where Talia Lysandra was the top dog, crushing games on turn 7. Riot said that was too fast. It feels like it kind of slowed down to about turn 9. And so, if you're going to play your big 9-drop unit on turn 9, the final turn of the game, it needs to outright win the game. Gorlith doesn't do that. And so it's not a function of his stats that are limiting him. It's the kind of pacing of the games and his cost. So sorry, bro, you're not doing it. Dusk Rider, catching some kind of upgrade. I don't know, it costs 4 mana now. The thing I thought was interesting with Dusk Rider is the wording on it, right? If we open the image, make it a little easier to see, he says, grant me +1/+1 for each time we've activated a Nightfall. And so he's a real team player, right? He's not out here on his own. He's thinking of us as he does this. And I'm surprised games haven't moved to speaking in this vernacular. I don't know the proper word for that, but the cards for the most part say I or you, right? I do something or when you do something. But if you listen to or talk to people playing video games, we always use the term we, right? If you listen to me talk whenever I'm in our gameplay, I say this is what we're doing. It's not what I'm doing, it's what we're going to do, me and you together, as you're mocking all my terrible plays. And so I think it's kind of interesting to think of this in the grammatical sense of them moving from using the words I and you to moving to these say when we activate. And so I'm curious to see if this is something we'll see them reword, if this is something they're going to use in the future, or if the intern got his hold on the text and the editor didn't notice it and it just slipped its way through. Because I did do a search on we, like the search features aren't great in this game, and I didn't see any other card in the game that said we. So I'm curious if that's something that they'll move with. And so gameplay-wise, we're not playing it. You know, easy, 0 out of 10. So, Reaver's Row costs 1 less mana, kind of interesting. I do love the Fishbones decks, the 1-cost cards matter style deck. Someone apparently has been running around with a Talia Reaver's Row deck as well, which now fits into the curve. And so I'm curious to see how this plays out. I don't think it's going to be a big impact to the meta, but, I'd like to try it. Spirits Unleashed now gives allies everywhere +1/+1. Kind of interesting. I don't think anyone has ever said that they want to play Spirits Unleashed, the physical card, but it is relevant in terms of being Udyr's flip. And so Udyr getting a flip ability that's a little bit more relevant, kind of nice, because I literally never cast Udyr's flip ability, and I have played quite a bit of the Bearman. And so a bit of an interesting update here. A couple more to go. Rot Colossus now makes a 4-cost Colossus in hand. If you have an 8/8 for 8 Overwhelm on the board and you equip it, you've won the game. I don't care if the one that you add to your hand is now free. That game is done. And so I guess it's a relevant upgrade to some degree, but for the most part, if you play your 8/8, equip it, and lose, something has gone significantly wrong, and that additional Colossus in your hand isn't going to fix it. Down here, the Darkin Ballista no longer deals damage to self. It officially becomes Bone Splitter. And I started to work the Darkin Ballista into some of our various Noxus aggro decks, was quite happy with it, and so all the better. I'm happy to see our Noxan cards get upgrades. We'll definitely be looking to play this a little bit more in the upcoming patches. Good stuff right there. Pathless Ancient now costs 2 less for each card recalled this turn. So instead of being a maximum cost of 2, you can now make this cost 0. Pretty reasonable. I could definitely see this seeing play in the various Yasuo-style decks, playing the Shimon Winds and the 1/3 dude that grows when you recall. Because the cost of free is a very great cost. And so as you're churning through your deck and drawing cards with Shimon Winds and then now getting to play the Pathless Ancients for free, pretty interesting and strong. I'm curious to see how this pans out. Voidseeker now can hit champions after you've evolved. Still not going to see play. So nice try, Voidseeker. I did have to read that a few times because I thought that initially that champions were players. And I was like, well, if it's evolved and sending damage to players, that is kind of interesting, right? It's in that space that makes Mystic Shot good, right? As you're on turn 10, dealing 2 damage to a unit doesn't matter anymore, so you get the Mystic Shot to the face. I thought Voidseeker was going to be in that same kind of space, but worse because it's in Shurima, right? It's slow, it deals the damage, it's bad at the beginning, but good at the end. Not the case. Maybe one day this will hit players to the face, but upgrading this to hit champions isn't enough to make it relevant. And then the last one, the Bandle's Tellstones replace Keeper's Verdict with Electro Harpoon. And this one, I don't quite feel like it's enough to push this into constructed playability, but I think this is an interesting upgrade, especially as we see more Mecha Yordle cards printed, right? The Mecha Yordle thing wants you to be discarding cards to get some kind of bonus effect. and adding one of these discard cards to the Tellstones adds a little bit of interestingness to the archetypes. And so if you're looking to play, say, a Boom Baboon Mecha Yordle style deck, having these additional discard outlets could be kind of nice. And so it just brings it tied in a little bit more with the synergies. I don't think this is a real make or break card, but I feel like it's definitely an upgrade over the Keeper's Verdict. And so that's it. That's the last one. That is going to finish off our review of the 3.19 patch. Agree or disagree, be sure to let me know. I'd love to see the comments, and that will do it for us today. And so I hope everyone enjoyed the video. Hope you maybe learned a thing or two along the way and had a good time watching. This is Bust, and we thank you for being here.